Alright guys, today we're going to give you an update on the LT swap that is going into my first car, a 1963 Studebaker Lark. The purpose of today's video is I want to talk about my plans for the build and give you a brief overview of where we sit. Part of my goal with this build is to kind of give a recipe for others who may be looking to do an LT swap into their vehicle. This isn't a Vortec 4200, so a lot of the problems can be solved without the use of a TIG welder, lathe, or a milling machine, so I wanted to take advantage of that as much as possible. Another goal is I wanted to keep the budget as low as possible within reason, and therefore I wanted to use aftermarket components that were very budget friendly and hopefully got us where we needed to go as affordably as possible. One of the really cool things about these engines is they're direct injected. That allows us really precise control of the combustion process, and I wanted to keep it in place for that reason. That being said, for higher power applications, the direct injection becomes very expensive, especially for guys that want to run alcohol fuels, and therefore you should really look to other solutions to make it all happen. Therefore, I decided that I wanted to add port injection, which would spray over top of the direct injection, in order to supply enrichment in boost. This is actually not out of the ordinary. GM actually does it on one of their factory vehicles. The LT5, I believe, has direct injection and port injection, which helps it make 750 horsepower. From my research, the most affordable way to do that was to adapt an LS7 intake to the engine. Boy, was I wrong. Right off the bat, I ran into fitment issues with the factory direct injection rails. Not only did the adapter plates hit the injection rails, but when I tried the intake, it also hit the rails as well. If I had read the fine print on the ICT Billet website, I would have clearly seen that you can't run the factory direct injection with this setup. That was totally my bad, and I should have done more research, and because of that, I had to spend more money. So we had to go about deleting the direct injection. Unfortunately, when deleting direct injection from really any engine, you're best off deleting the direct injector entirely. This is because if you keep it, it sort of turns into a glow plug in your combustion chamber and will cause you some issues. Those of you that follow Stephen Papadakis will know that when he did his 1000 horsepower B58 build and deleted the direct injection, he had some serious issues with what I just talked about, and because of that, we are going to be deleting the direct injectors entirely. Therefore, I had to buy these injector delete blanks from Motion Raceworks, which basically take up the space of the factory direct injector and plug the hole. And they weren't cheap. While I was there, I had to buy this direct injector lifter delete plug, which eliminated the direct injection pump and allowed oil to get to where it needs to go. Also, I had to buy these, a direct injector hold down bracket, because as I mentioned earlier, the injection rails hit the intake. From there, I was excited to finally bolt down my intake for the first time. What's it hitting on now? You've got to be kidding me. One really nice thing about these engines is the oil pressure port is right here in the front of the engine. This makes feeding your turbo pretty easy because the port is already very close to where a turbo might be situated. Unfortunately, this cover plate that I bought doesn't have an oil pressure port. So probably the most disappointing thing about this whole intake conversion is how much I have invested in it. So far, I have $923 into the intake, adapter plate, plugs, hold down brackets, and valley cover, and I still don't have fuel rails added into that total. I very easily could have a Holley high ram on this thing, and frankly, I would prefer that. So in short, don't buy this. Buy a Holley high ram. Enough complaining, let's move on to our plans for the transmission. Alright guys, let's talk about the transmission. So, something that I learned from Midwest Drags is having a Turbo 400 is great because they're very affordable and it's very easy to make them handle a lot of horsepower. However, on the street, they're not so great. With higher stall torque converters, you really go down the highway at a pretty high RPM, and it gets to be pretty unbearable, especially for days where you have, 200 to 300 miles of driving. Therefore, since I want to take this car on a drag and drive event or two, my plans are to put a 4L80E. This will allow us to have lockup and overdrive, and it'll cruise down the road like a modern car. Now, my goals are to do this on a budget as well, so we are going to go with a mostly stock 4L80E, which I'll have looked over by a friend. And for the torque converter, I'm going to use something that I've been wanting to play with for a little while. As you guys know, we run the JEGS 60429 torque converter on most of our other vehicles. The twin turbo LS 1000 horsepower Nova runs one, and the 700 horsepower Vortec 4200 powered station wagon runs one, and that converter has no troubles holding high amounts of horsepower. What I recently found out is that JEGS makes basically the same torque converter, but with lockup and for a 4L80E. So I want to try this torque converter in this combination and see how it works. Right now we have a Turbo 400 core mocked up in here. At some point we will drop this out and stick a 4L80E in it and get it all situated. We'll probably have to rework this transmission mount. This car has been through a lot of evolutions. It originally had a T5 transmission in it. Then we put a Turbo 350 in it. Most recently it had a Turbo 400. And now we're going to stick a 4L80E in it. So we're probably going to have to rework some of this cross member here to make it all work. But that's just work we're going to have to do in the future, so stay tuned for that. Next, let's move on to the rear. Alright guys, the last thing we're going to talk about today is the rear end. We have been running this 8.5-inch 10-bolt in the car for basically as long as it's been together. And before that, it was actually run in one of my dad's drag cars, and he beat the crap out of it before I even got a hold of it. So, needless to say, this rear end has been through a rough life, and it's probably in desperate need of some service. Rather than service the thing, we're actually going to just swap the entire thing out for a Ford 8.8 because it's easier to find parts, they are more readily available, they're stronger, and we already own the parts to do it. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Alright, let's move on to the conclusion. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I'm really looking forward to getting this project off the ground, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what the LT platform is capable of. But to see that, you're going to have to stay tuned for future episodes. So make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe. maybe consider becoming a channel member by hitting the join button down below, and we'll see you in the next one. From the outside looking in, people probably think drag racers are crazy. We spend so much time trying to make the experience as short as possible, but there's so much more to it than that. Between nitrous and blowers and turbos, you can't simply break down drag racing to just floor it and keep the wheels straight.